Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts, Ariana and Seth.
This is the Pop Cult Podcast. I'm Seth.
I'm Ariana.
And today we've got two new 2024 releases to talk about. A little later, we'll be talking about the indie fantasy adventure, I guess you would call it, Riddle of Fire.
Yeah.
But first up, we're going to be talking about Richard Linklater's latest film, Hitman, starring Glen Powell. Professional killer Gary Johnson breaks protocol to help a desperate woman trying to flee an abusive husband and finds himself falling for her. This was, I think, released in theaters back at the end of May, but it is a Netflix release, so available to all Netflix subscribers now. Ariana, before we talk about this movie, one of the question I want you to have in your mind is this. By the end of this movie, is our character, Gary Johnson, his real self in the end, or is he still playing a role? So be thinking about that. This is the newest film from Richard Linklater, a very well-known American filmmaker who started out doing lots of indie films. I would say he's probably best known at this point for probably School of Rock.
Yeah.
Of all of his movies. I knew him for a long time as the guy who made Dazed and Confused. That was kind of his like hallmark movie. And when I sat down, I realized I have watched a lot of his movies. I've seen Slacker, which I think was his first feature, Dazed and Confused, Before Sunrise, Suburbia, Waking Life, School of Rock, Bad News Bears, Fast Food Nation, A Scanner Darkly, Bernie, and Boyhood. And it's the same kind of thoughts I had about Steven Soderbergh when I wrote my review for Sex, Lies, and Videotape. I've seen a lot of this person's movies, and I feel very ambivalent about their work.
Yeah.
I just don't have a strong opinion either way.
I think it's also having to do with the fact that it's not as if he has a strong voice or vision.
I'm going to push back on that a little later, because as I was sitting down and writing my notes, I did realize, this movie does have an aspect that shows up in a lot of Linklater's films.
Maybe you'll explain that to me or mansplain it to me. Just kidding.
Watch yourself. Because I think in this film, we have a philosophy professor as our main character.
Yeah.
And there's a big questions about identity. And when you think of a movie like Waking Life, or you think of a movie like A Scanner Darkly, those are the same big themes in those movies too. I think it's the delivery is where I think things get a little muddy here. The film is based on an article written by Skip Hollingsworth for Texas Monthly, who was the same writer, and it was the same magazine where Linklater got his inspiration for the Bernie film with Jack Black and Shirley MacLaine. So he clearly likes Skip's writing, and Skip seems to pick interesting topics. The vibe I got here is this was basically about a philosophy or psychology professor who worked part-time with the police, and they do stings where they have someone posing as a hitman for hire. They get the person to say on recording that they want to kill someone, hand over money, and then they arrest the person. Feels a little entrapment-y to me. And they lightly address that in the movie, but not much. Because my thing would be, I guess the idea is that they're going to try to hurt this person one way or another, so we're getting them off the streets, which is a dubious claim to make. What did you think of the film's leading man, who's been the big selling point of the movie, from what I can tell, Glen Powell?
I think he did a pretty good job. I almost wish that there was maybe a little tiny bit more focus on him as this undercover agent of sorts, and how maybe it conflicted, or maybe how he was doing some sort of like thesis of sorts about his work, versus we get a little bit of a montage, but it's also to the point that it feels almost early 2000s sensation of we're watching a person show how many people is he able to imitate, which isn't terrible. I think it's just I almost wanted them to go really for it. Mind you, I think this is a pretty decent film.
I would say I agree with the feel of the early 2000s. Uh, it was a very underwhelming film, in my opinion, because it's gotten so much praise and so much hype I've seen. So I was like, oh, wow, this must be a pretty good movie. And then as it unfolded before me, I just kept going like, oh, that's what they're gonna do? Oh. It just felt like it ended up being formulaic by the end, where I kind of knew where it was going. I also think it had a lot of issues with tone. Like, I have no problem somebody doing like, action comedy. That works, right? But this film would be a noir screwball comedy rom-com, but then there's like Linklater accents around the edge. It feels very unfocused on what it wants to be. It seems like he's trying to do a lot of things at once.
I think it's sort of like they're trying to make a recall towards the moments of having a film that is for adults, right? This is clearly not a family film. This is not a film that you're going to sit down, watch with your like less than 13 or 14-year-old child.
But I would also argue it's not that smart of a movie.
Yeah, and I think that is where it misses a little bit.
It's for dumb adults, yeah.
Yeah, it is charming at times. I think like Glen Powell and Ardria Arjona have great chemistry together. I think it's just sort of like if you're going to be action, I need you to amp up the action. And there are moments that it felt a little convoluted because
Yeah. There's
he
a lot of spinning plates in this
yeah,
movie.
for example, her character, it felt like a stable character like throughout the movie, right? You think she's lying, it turns out she's not lying, and it kind of she fits the bill perfectly, she captures it perfectly. With his character, I almost wanted for him to either have a sense of like guilt or be wondering if what he was doing was right or wrong.
Because at the end, I kind of felt like he plays off as a sociopath when you get to the end of the movie. Like,
Yeah.
what?
And I think it's like this weird thing. They kind of address it when in the film we're introduced to his ex-wife, who turns out
It's in
him
one scene of the
that
movie,
it's
yeah.
like in one scene, it turns out they're still very good friends, and that she's like telling him, like, fuck having a normal relationship, because it's sort of like she's kind of like basically being like, you're a psychologist, you can't have a normal relationship because you're going to be psychoanalyzing everyone. And then there's this whole thing about him liking the mundane simpleness of his whole life to then be wrapped up in this undercover stuff, and it's not as if it ever really affects his personal life.
What personal life?
Like, yeah.
Also, here's a question. Name 3 things about the character of Maddie.
She had multiple jobs at some point,
She
but I think,
did?
yeah, I think it's this weird thing
Here's
is
the
like,
one thing we know about her. She's married to a bad guy.
yeah,
That's it. She is not a character.
no, I
She
think we're like
exists
we're
pure.
relying on like our Arjona's charm, which is like in the film shines through.
But the problem is, for me to care about a character, I need to know some things and understand the character. And we see her in the context of trying to hire Gary to kill her husband. We see her in the context of starting a relationship where she's just constantly having sex with Gary to the point of like a little bit of absurdity. And then she gets involved in some unsavory things at the end, and that's like it. And I think all her scenes took place in what, like 2 locations, 2 or 3?
Yeah.
And I never really knew who Maddie was. I never really cared about Maddie. I think I knew a little bit more about Gary just because he's in so much of the movie.
Yeah.
But even then, outside of being a psychology professor and working part-time for the police,
And birding.
that's about it. Um, one of the things that I right away I was like, oh, this movie is really asking me to suspend my disbelief, and I can't, was that I don't believe Powell when they try to emphasize the nerdy schlubby aspects of the character. He is not believable in that. Like his physiology, just looking at him, you're like, this is not a nerdy schlubby guy. What are you talking about? And so immediately I did not buy that. He's doing a decent job acting. Like he's not a bad actor, but his physicality undermines
Yeah,
his acting.
it's almost like they should have given him like longer facial hair to like facial hair a little bit unkept, because what it is like he kind of at some point grows like the perfect
Stubble
midnight stubble, right?
or 5 o'clock
And
shadow.
5 o'clock shadow kind of thing. And it's supposed to be just take off. It's basically like the cliche,
Superman and Clark Kent.
well, it's the cliche of the early 2000s. You take off a girl's glasses and suddenly she's hot.
I wrote in my notes, this is the male equivalent to She's All That. Like, where it's like, okay, I'm not an idiot. I can look at a person and go, oh, well, that's a very conventionally attractive person who's wearing glasses.
And I think it's sort of like there should have been at some point a remark between like the police officers that work with him about being like, oh hey Gary, I know that you typically wear glasses, but if you push your hair out of your face, then like there's this whole scene that like it's supposed to be Gary normally does not does not go in the state. He's like there to help
Operating the
recording,
equipment, yeah.
because like
Or he's in the ear of the cop because he knows psychology. So it's say this to get them to say this.
or it's like he's heard it 1,000 times.
Yeah.
And it's this one of those instances that he talks to the guy that like normally does it, but he's been suspended, only changes his pants. And there should have been a moment that like the other two were like, you know what? Take off your glasses, pull your hair back.
Well, there's a comedy beat between Phil and then the female police officer played by Retta.
Yeah.
Where you have them bantering about like, this dude looks like a hitman, right? Like making fun, doing almost like meta commentary on the fact that, yeah, Glen Powell looks like a leading man in a Hollywood movie. Let's not pretend that he's not, kind of a thing.
Yeah, because it's
but the movie
supposed to
never does
be
that.
like this weird thing that like I don't know if they're dropping him off at home or something afterwards,
I think.
Or they're kind of like, God, he's so boring. Or they're just like, was he joking there? Because he talked about like, oh, he went into the woods at some point because he was birding, and he started talking about this bird, like 3 different versions of the same bird, and how like that was really cool, and that they were just kind of like, I didn't know that he was this much of a fucking nerd. And it's supposed to be like a flaw in his personality, but I think it's also just like this weird thing of it being like so it's hard to detail, because suddenly also like in the film when he is pretending to be the hitman, he's suddenly so perfect.
He's so much more believable as that than he is the guy he's supposed to be.
That he doesn't stumble, and you almost wish like he would have stumbled just a little bit.
Yeah.
So we could see maybe like he was building up all these characters. Instead, it's supposed to be he gets so into it that later on he starts developing costumes.
Yeah.
He starts painting his face.
There's never a moment where he's failing at this.
Yeah.
And that would make it more interesting if, you know, his first time out, he stumbles, or he's right away, he's great at it. And then eventually he hits someone before Maddie where he fumbles.
Yeah.
Or he has to recover. Or it could be after he meets Maddie and then he starts to realize like, oh, I'm kind of losing what I had because I made it real.
Yeah.
So now when I'm meeting these people, I'm starting to see them as like real people, and it's making it harder for me to like lure them in.
Yeah, because Jasper, who Gary is taking over from, is being suspended for 120 days.
He's assaulted teenagers and it got caught on camera.
Black teenagers.
Yeah.
And it's, I think also the other thing about this film is it's almost supposed to be like, yeah, cops aren't cool. We're going to underline cops aren't cool, but Gary's cool.
Yeah.
And
it feels like it's a bad apples argument where it's like, we do know we have to acknowledge that cops mistreat people constantly, but we also want to make this movie about cops.
Yeah, and it's this weird thing that again, like it's not as if like Glen Powell did, he like it's not as if he was phoning it in. He is giving it his all.
Well, Glen Powell's not the problem with the movie.
No, I think I know that for a fact that they didn't have much of a budget for this film because like they also struggled to get distribution until Netflix picked it up. They wanted to be in theaters, so they had to argue with Netflix in order to get it into theaters before it was exclusively on Netflix.
But I don't give it any of that because if this was made by like a first time or young filmmaker, okay, this is Richard Linklater.
Yeah.
This guy's been making movies for what, going on 40 years probably.
I think it's just I haven't seen anything of his that really has impressed me.
He's way too chill
yeah,
on certain things. But then like you watch something like A Scanner Darkly and you're like, where is this? Or Before Sunrise. And you're like, this is amazing. Why are you doing these other things that are so much less? I mean, I guess he has fun with it. That would be the way to
that's the
describe it.
one thing like you like this. It isn't a dull movie. I think it's just sort of like if we're going to talk about smart comedies, this is not
No.
it. It's not a dumb comedy, but it's not
It's borderline.
It's borderline, yeah.
I hated the use of voiceover. I felt that it was definitely being used to cover gaps in editing or where they were looking at the script and they weren't sure if the audience was going to understand something. So they had Glen Powell do some ADR in post-production. I don't like it.
At the
It's
beginning
bad.
where he's kind of like, oh, I was content with my life.
It was the kind of voiceover that you're expecting to hear. I guess you're wondering how I ended up here. Like that kind of voiceover where it doesn't enhance the movie in a way that made me go, oh, I see why there's voiceover in there. If the movie had leaned more into the noir aspects of itself, then you could have used it as a stylistic thing. But it doesn't. And Gary's tone in the voiceover is always sort of like, I'm trying to think of the word. It's just he's so above it all. He's just like, and then this happened, and this happened.
So sure of himself.
Yeah, there's never a sense of panic or that things are going to go bad.
Because there's also like this weird thing because I think back about like Madison the character. There at some point there is like this confusion because like it's supposed to be, oh, she likes this guy, she's attracted to him, but then once the moment that he pulls out a gun in her defense, she is supposed to be turned on about it, but that is very confusing afterwards when you think about like the ending of the film or his personality in total, because he's not as upset as he should be. And again, it's relying heavily on these two characters' charms.
Yes.
Like how charming can they be on screen, which is very charming, like entertaining for the hour and a half, whatever. But if we're going to dive 2 hours, but if you're going to dive into it, that's all you have is charm.
Well, but that's my problem with the Madison character is she is such a poorly written character that she, as you were saying, she changes personality based on what the movie needs the plot to do now.
And I think it doesn't work, especially if you're not being clear that this is exclusively through his point of view, especially as he remarks afterwards that he changed to be the person that he wanted to be.
But it doesn't matter because her character should be consistent, right?
Yeah.
Or if we learn things about her that contrast with our preconceived notions, that should play into the film.
Yeah.
And it doesn't. She doesn't approve of this. Now she approves of this because we need this moment to happen in the movie.
Yeah.
I don't think it's his best, but that's kind of his career. It's a very irregular up and down sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like I was saying before, is if I go through his movies, his early stuff, super indie. I find that like School of Rock to me feels like the beginning of the second period of Linklater's career, where he went from kind of the guy who made like weird indie stuff out of Austin to now he is a successful Hollywood filmmaker, but not of big budget movies, but those mid-tier
like
movies.
Respectful, like kind of
after
thing.
School of Rock, they had him do the Bad News Bears remake, which was terrible.
Yeah.
But then he did Fast Food Nation, which was a weird like comedy docudrama about
Yeah, I never saw that. I remember seeing
that was when
trailers.
Glen Powell, that was his first work with him. He had a small
Okay.
role in that. Um the I would be fine if most movies in theaters were like this. Just okay, entertaining movies because it's not a franchise.
Yeah.
It's not some sort of mega movie where we've wasted like the GDP of a small country on it. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, they spent $8.8 million on the budget, and it's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Uh, it feels a little too Netflixy for me at some points. Because we'll get into more talking about the texture of what a film looks like in our next review coming up
Mhm.
here. Because in thinking about it, I was like, oh yeah, there really is a different aesthetic feel. This feels so sterile and commercial looking.
Yeah, there was for example, I like the shots that when um Maddie and quote unquote Ron,
Mhm.
Gary's other personality when he's around her, are out on dates. Like they do some nice coloring at least on the dance floor. But then the criminal shots of people that were being convicted for plotting just look like a bad Photoshop. Like they just
Yeah,
and then I did not really like the whole court scenes. I think the court scenes were
they were very redundant.
it was real. It's
And I didn't like, I got why they were there, but after we had one of them, I don't know why we need to
it's
keep
also
going back.
it's a strange thing to put in, especially if he's not gonna have any guilt or any moment of just being like, oh fuck, now they know what my real name is, my real last name, and they can these people can legitimately try to hurt me.
Well, like if you think about the last, uh, well, like how the movie ends,
Yeah.
and then you compare it to what those courtroom scenes are having him attempt to say, these are two contradictory messages.
Yeah, and the thing
It's
is,
not, oh, I'm protecting people from da da da. And then what he and Madison do at the end of the movie, I'm like, but you're those people.
I think
So what the fuck is going on?
it's very weird because I think about the texture of the last scenes, which I enjoyed a little bit better versus the court scenes, which the court scenes feel like they were added last minute because it's him and then the accused actors which were available. There's none of his co-workers who are the actual police people there. It's him at times being in the witness stand, which I feel like he shouldn't have been.
Well, yeah, it's the fake hitman. I feel like they would have just put the like command officer in like command or whatever.
Yeah,
And they would have been the one because they were in charge of the operation or something,
like
not the guy pretending to be the hitman. Because with undercover cops, like you don't reveal their identities because you compromise them and then they can't be sent back out into the
exactly.
field.
Like you don't want their name or their face out there because that means
In an open courtroom.
yeah, because it feels they might go oh we don't want him to do the hitman thing. We want him to go follow, do something else.
And he's also a civilian. He's not a cop.
Yeah, so it was this bizarre thing in order to make these comments versus just being he could have easily been writing a thesis of or of each person of
Or this could have been
analyzing.
going on in his head.
Yeah. And which I thought that would at the beginning, the first time we had it, I thought it was in his head because the woman starts going Gary Johnson, blah blah blah. And I was like, oh, it must be a dream. And then when it kept going on, I'm like, is that a dream? It's not I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be that maybe he was listening to the court hearings because he wanted to know what happened, but it wasn't.
I also feel like I do resent very pretty people in movies because having watched a lot of old movies and seeing who they claimed were very pretty and led movies and they look more like normal human beings. I'd much prefer that than people who have like veneers and hair plugs and things like that, which I'm sure Glen Powell does. Come on, we're not going to pretend that he
Yeah.
doesn't. Um, because I was thinking, I love screwball comedies. I would love to see more movies like Preston Sturges or Howard Hawks, like Bringing Up Baby, to come back into style, but I'm not holding my breath on that.
Yeah.
I think the dark ending of the movie is the only part of Hitman that I found interesting, and it's the end, so it doesn't really explore it in any way. I would say this is not why I watch movies.
No.
There are people giving this thing like 4 and 5 stars on Letterboxd, And I'm like, I mean, I guess if that's your thing, but for me, this is the definition of mid-tier.
But I think it's like we also have to talk about the fact that I am like at fault of saying like we all miss the mid-tier movie, right? And I think what's happening with the mid-tier movie as there's like a small resurgence of it, not a lot, but still people end up praising it more than you need to.
Well, because like if you go back and we've watched like, what would be considered mid-tier movies from like the 80s, the 70s, the 60s, the 50s, the 40s, the 30s. And the thing that I like about those standout movies, like let's say Ernst Lubitsch, right? They're very smart. They don't have the most complex plot. They're not the most like artistic films, but you can tell the person who made them, they just really like making movies, and they're really sharp, and they know how to like write people that talk in a way that makes you want to listen to them, and they make you feel the people falling in love with each other, so you're like, oh yeah, I totally get it.
Yeah.
And this movie and so many movies like it now seem incapable of doing that. It's like people who are making movies now don't understand why people fall in love. Maybe it's just capitalism and the transactional nature of like life in the US at this point. Because the vibe I got near the end was very dark and cynical, but I don't think the movie wanted that vibe, right?
I think I felt like with the end that they established, they probably did, but then decided to put in some filler because they wanted Gary to be likable.
The very, very last scene felt like a weird 180 from the scene right before.
Yeah.
And it left me very confused when the end credits started rolling about how am I supposed to feel about Gary? Am I supposed to like this guy? Am I not supposed to like this guy? And the vibe I got was I'm supposed to like him. He's supposed to be a likable guy.
And I think that's a problem that has to do with the fact that like viewers, I think because this thing in this movie didn't have the funding that it probably like didn't have
it
the
wouldn't
security.
have made a difference. It would have made a difference because this is Richard Linklater. Look at his movies. You could give him $1 billion and he's still going to make a Richard Linklater movie, and it might be a Before Sunrise or a Scanner Darkly, but it's likely going to be a Fast Food Nation or a Bad News Bears, which is going to be like, what?
It makes me feel as if like, like there's actors, because I think about like Julianne Moore has said this before. She's only as good as a director who pushes her through, right?
And it's true because I've seen her in some shit.
And it just feels like this director is only as good as his actors are able to push through. Because you think about Before Sunrise, that is so...
The actors are bringing a lot to that.
Yeah, the actors are bringing a lot, and they are essentially those characters.
Yeah.
In that
they're playing versions of themselves.
And like you think about Boyhood, you think about like how Ethan Hawke during that time, he was like not a great like partner to be with.
Yeah.
And how like he looks at that film and he's like,
I feel like Ethan Hawke is just an incredible actor.
Yeah, but when you think about like how he made that movie within the years and how he was like he watched that movie and like he will feel like a sadness within him because he's like, yeah, I'm playing this really horrible like husband, and at the time I was being a horrible husband. Yeah. And it's just like how he's putting all in on the table, and so now the director is like basically taking advantage of that versus these up and coming actors that might need a little like push and shove are just displaying what's on.
Well, I think Glen Powell is co-writer. He's a friend of Linklater's. That's why he did it. Adria Arjona, I'm guessing.
She really believed it because I looked up. I was like, she believed in this whole project. Like she.
And like once again, it's not a failure. It's
it's not.
It's just a meh movie. Going back to the question I asked you at the beginning. So at the end of this movie, are we looking at Gary Johnson, or is he still playing a role even to Madison?
I think he's playing like he is himself, but I think it just turns out he's been
he's a phony.
He's a phony the whole time.
And more important question: Glen Powell's Gary Johnson versus Michael Fassbender's The Killer, Battle of the Netflix Assassins. Who wins?
It's gonna be Fassbender.
And I say if you're gonna watch a Netflix assassination movie about a hired gun, The Killer's much better, and it's funnier too.
Yeah, I think it's also having to do with the fact of like, do you want to watch something that might engage your brain, and then you have to go like, oh man, this director is actually talking about making movies and making fun of himself, or do you want to put on something that's like going to turn off your brain? This is kind of more of turning off your brain, but you might get upset after.
But my counter to that is, I think way too many people, every time they sit down to watch movie or TV, are turning off their brain. That's the thing.
Yeah.
When it's every once in a while, turn off your brain, nothing wrong with that. But when people's habits are to always be turning their brains off, eventually the question is, so when you going to turn your brain on? It seems like you just permanently shut it off.
Never, because this world is a shithole.
But see, that's why I want movies that are more intense with me and like confront me with like truths and things like that. I find that very entertaining and thrilling to watch. I barely laughed watching this movie.
No.
I didn't get caught up in any of the like. I think the thing I enjoyed the most was when Gary takes Jasper trying to incriminate him and flips it around on Jasper. That was like the one clever piece of writing where I'm like, oh, that's a real, I've never seen someone in a movie do that, and that's actually a smart thing. But that was like it.
I think the moment that I kind of disengaged with the film and I only got a small chuckle out of me was when his imitation of like
Patrick Bateman
Patrick
from
Bateman.
American Psycho. Yeah.
And it was at first kind of like, haha, okay, that's cute. But then afterwards, I'm actually bothered by it.
When you're like, why? Like, how did that add to the movie? It was just like, hey, Glenn, do your Patrick Bateman impersonation and we'll film it. And because there was a scene where he's like holding a dog and the dog's licking his face. And I was like, oh, that was just like they shot that and that's just Glen Powell.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh, throw that in the movie. That's cute.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's not how you build a movie. When I think back to like, for some reason, I was thinking of The Devil and Max Devlin with Elliot Gould and Bill Cosby as Satan.
Yeah.
Typecast. And so the way that movie just kind of wandered around, that's how that movie felt, where it's like, okay, we're gonna go here now. Like, oh, there's a plot about a singer. Okay, there's a plot about BMX dirt bikes. Okay, that's the way this movie kind of felt, where it was like, oh, the first 30 minutes. Okay, I know what this movie is. Oh, okay, it's not that. We're gonna do this. Oh, okay. Oh, okay, now it's a romance. Oh, okay. And now there's like a murder thing and the cops, well, what? Like it just kept switching tracks. And you can do that, but you have to have a much smarter script than this movie had.
Yeah, and I think it's just, to me, Gary came off like he was above it all. And he just didn't, it just didn't feel human to me.
Three mischievous children embark on a woodland odyssey in order to retrieve a blueberry pie. Along the way, they evade a gang, encounter a witch, and grow closer together as friends. This is Riddle of Fire, an indie film shot in Utah, written, directed, and edited, and I think probably produced by Weston Rizzulli. Ariana, my opening question for you on this.
We have an opening question
Yeah.
on both.
Yeah. Who would win in a fight? And we'll answer this at the end. The three kids from this film or the Douglas brothers from 1993's Three Ninjas?
Oh boy.
So I want you to think about that. So this movie was shot on 16 millimeter, which I believe would be the first thing people notice about it, is that visual aspect. Talk to me about how you felt about the 16 millimeter film.
It was a choice that I did not expect. There's like almost like yellow sepia tints towards it. And so it highlights
There's
like
a grain.
the reds, certain blues. It does feel like watching an old VHS tape.
The director, Weston Rizzulli, who is in the film as one of the members of the Enchanted Blade gang, said he was inspired by 1970s live-action Disney films.
That makes perfect sense.
So you think like the Apple Dumpling Gang, you think of Pete's Dragon, you think of The Devil and Max Devlin was a 1970s Disney movie. There's like a certain look, and they seem to take place in a world where things are possible that aren't possible in our world.
Yeah.
But it's not too far off from our world. I found that the film also seemed clearly inspired by things in people like Wes Anderson in some of the composition, especially when the kids are like, getting their loadouts before they head
Yeah.
out, and the way the camera kind of everything's lined up and the camera kind of is a static shot and you have the kids like pointing at things and naming them as they go. I think there's a little Napoleon Dynamite in here, which is probably tied back to Utah because the writer director of that film is also a Utah native. So I think there's just something about Utah people being real weird and nostalgic.
I mean, especially the question is he Mormon or is he not Mormon?
If he's in Utah, even if he's not Mormon, Mormonism has influenced his life,
Yeah.
right? Like, because I think that's one of the states where you have to have your ID on a database so you can look at pornography websites.
Yep.
Very weird. But it's also inspired the Goonies,
Definitely.
but also things like Lord of the Rings. And I would even say like that old Rankin Bass Lord of the Rings cartoon that we recently rewatched because it's that sort of, there's a cheesiness to it, but it's charming.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a Saturday morning type of film, like
but
something
not for families.
No, it's. I think it's for families, but it depends on
I
your
would
kid's
say
age.
Alice, one of the girls, drops a fuck at one point when they have hidden in the back of someone's truck and they get out and goes, "Where the fuck are we?" So it's like, if you're okay with your kids hearing that, then go ahead. There's no like gratuitous, there's no nudity at all. There's no
No.
sex. It's cursing. And then violence. I wouldn't even say there's much violence.
Not really.
There's like the threats of violence.
Yeah, threats of violence. There's also just kids with paintball guns shooting, kids stealing shit, which is like an amusing thing in this film.
Speaking of, what did you think of the kid acting in this movie?
I think it's pretty decent. It's one where they're not delivering the most amazing performances. It's not as if the line delivery is, spot on every time, but it's still funny at most times. Like the youngest little kid would just say like the random shit, and then like the girl that plays Petal felt very much like she wanted to be a Broadway kid at some point.
I loved the kid acting in this movie. I thought it was perfect. I think it was perfect.
For this type of genre, yes.
Because it was so authentic.
Yeah.
I loved how serious the kids are taking things, but they're taking it serious in a way that a child takes something serious and then trying to emulate the way they think adults would talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
When you're like, well, no, I mean, the thing that you're up against is not that big of a problem. So as an adult, you're not going to be this serious and hard-nosed about it. Because like the whole catalyst of the film is they're trying to get the blueberry pie because Jody and Hazel's mom is sick.
And it's the one thing that she feels would make her feel better.
So they go to the lady who makes the pie. Which you loved that lady in that whole scene.
She knew what movie she was in. Okay. Yeah. She delivered her lines perfectly. The eye rolling, the scoffing was great.
And so she gives them the recipe. What did they have to get her in exchange for the recipe?
He said that she was too hot to do anything, and that she's
not even ice was cooling.
Yeah, down. And so she wanted something that was colder than ice. So they give her a pack of gum.
Wintergreen. It's wintergreen. It's wintergreen. They keep emphasizing that.
They give her a pack of ice.
And she said, I said colder than ice.
And then they give her a weird doll that they found like on the
plane. That was my favorite one.
And it was like, she's like, ugh, this thing gives me chills. So you actually helped. Yeah. So she gives them the recipe.
So they get all the ingredients. And then when they go to get the last carton of eggs in the supermarket, which is I love that it's of all the things there'd be one left of on the shelf.
And it has to be speckled eggs.
Speckled eggs. This big dude, who we later learn is John Redeye. He's referred to by his full name the entire film. Takes it. Well, John Redeye turns out to be a member of the Enchanted Blade gang, run by Anna Freya, who also has a daughter, Petal, who's kind of opens the film with this sort of mystical hippie-ish narration. And so the kids pursue John Redeye, and it becomes kind of an ongoing joke of this is for the eggs. Like the extent, especially Alice, who's the oldest of the kids and is kind of the leader, is intent on getting these specific eggs back just because she hates this guy so much.
Yeah, because I like that. I think it's the youngest one. What's his name?
Jody?
Like Jody is like, we could just go to the corner store by the Mexican place. It'll be fine. And she's like, no, I need to get that woodsy bastard.
Woodsy bastard. She keeps calling him that woodsy bastard. But yeah, it felt kind of like Bad News Bears, the
Yeah.
original, where it's just
You mean not the remake?
no, not the Richard
I've
Linklater.
never seen the remake.
It's basically they got what's his face? The dude from Sling Blade, Billy Bob Thornton.
Oh, wow.
He plays the coach, and it was, they saw Bad Santa and said, oh, you'll play the Mathau role. And he just kind of plays the character from Bad Santa with maybe a little more heart because it's from the director of School of Rock.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's those elements. But it felt like the original Bad News Bears were just kids would say stuff like, well, shit. and the way kids really do talk when there's no adults around.
Yeah.
And they're mad. And I loved that aspect of it because I think a lot of times with kid media now, it's so like there's some things that did need to get rid of, like, excessive violence in kids stuff is bad, right?
Yeah.
But kids cussing is not bad. It doesn't hurt anyone.
Yeah, I understand, like, for example, the removal of like gross out humor to a certain extent, right? Because like I think we watched some like Ren and Stimpy stuff like last
that's
year,
extreme.
where it was just kind of like, I'm like, why was I watching this at 6 years old? But I was like 7 or something, which doesn't make it better. But it is, I think it's also like this. It's so fun to see kids that seem like they already know who they are.
Yeah, they're very confident.
Yeah, where it's like sort of like, yeah, they're being a little bit bad. I think what's like makes it super interesting is like when we're introduced to them, they have already committed a crime. These a game soul. Like, remember that's
the heist. I forgot about. Yeah, the whole opening heist where they steal a game console from the like warehouse before it's been released.
Yes.
But then get foiled by the parental controls on the TV.
Yes. And how like the mom is like, my favorite is like the mom is like, it's summer. You should be outside. So it's supposed to be the joke that, yeah, they did go outside. They're
very outside kids.
Like they had a whole fucking adventure that lasted like more than 24 hours. And it's like endearing to a certain point. You think like, oh, they're gonna follow this gang, they're gonna get the eggs and be done. But it's like much more bigger than that.
And it's good though. It's so good. I really, really loved this movie. I had a lot of fun with it. It kept my attention. I think it's a perfect stoner movie.
Yeah.
Like if you're gonna, have an edible, smoke some weed, perfect movie to put on because the peril the kids are in is never that serious.
No.
It's all cartoon logic, essentially. I read that the editing took over a year.
I feel like they probably were trying to make sure it made sense.
And it was Weston Rizzulli edited it, and it just seems like he really loves this movie. And this and it was Leo Tipton, who plays Anna Freya, was a co-producer on it.
Okay.
And I can imagine how she got involved, is I think he sold her on it because he believed in this world and this story and the tone of it, that it's the kind of thing that when you watch it, you're like, oh man, I would love to see more movies that are like this.
Well, let's also highlight your favorite line of the film. 3 goblins.
Oh, well, they're called 3 goblins. Yeah.
Yeah, which is like, but I love how you were like, at first I was like not paying it like too much attention because I was just like, okay, 3, but you're like, that is the perfect description.
Yeah, they're 3 little goblins. Yeah. They're like getting into people's shit and messing it up and causing all kinds of chaos, and they don't care because they're so single-minded. I love how overflowing the movie is with plot and characters.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like a kid telling a long-winded story where you just want to know, like, why were you late for dinner? And then they just go into something, well, I went here and I had to go do this. And then they were there, and then I got in a fight with them. So then I went over here, and you're just like, I just want to know, like, what made you late?
I love, like, the nightclub scene when
The
they're...
Hall of they called it Honors or something.
Hall of Horror or something like
Yeah.
Honor. Like it's I love that like Petal's like, we can go to this place, and they're like, where is it? It's a place that like my mom and her friends go to party. And sometimes she takes me with her. And I do love like at some other point she says, yeah, my mom taught me that it's like she could be like a good mom sometimes, but not a great mom.
Yeah.
It's this underlining like her mom isn't great because she's brought her to a place to party, and no adult questions.
And they're like, it's like a bar and
Yeah.
stuff, but they're just like, oh, hey, it's you. I saw a great comment on Letterboxd, and I was like, yeah, this is the world inside the head of Mooney in the Florida Project.
That would work. Yeah.
And I feel like, yeah, I would love for Weston Rizzulli to get in contact with Sean Baker, maybe to help him produce his next movie.
Yeah.
Because I feel like they have a very similar, it's childlike, but they're not willing to show the dark aspects of life. So there's like an innocence mixed with an edge.
Yeah, there's an edge to it, but it's never gonna like expose you to like, you know, that there's a danger out there.
Yeah.
You know that the world is unfair, but there's always going to be someone to protect you. I think of like Willem Dafoe when he like notices like a creep around the kid,
Yeah.
and he shoos them away.
And so no one's ever going to hurt these kids in this movie.
Or like the guy who had the egg and it was like, I want $30 for it. You know what? I want $100. And it's just like, you're like, I love being an adult being like, why are you asking a kid for $100?
When I love how mad, I think it's Phoebe Farrow who plays Alice. Of the three kids, I think she was the one who was going for it. Every one of them is fantastic.
Yeah, I like when she's arguing with Hazel, and Hazel's like, why do you always have to take charge? She's like, I don't take charge, I just take over.
Yeah. Well, and then the hilarious unrequited love between Hazel and Alice, because there's that scene where it's the two boys, they're hanging out on the ridge, and like they pop their shirts off to get a tan.
Well, no, like she told them, take off your clothes because they got wet, and she's like, go dry them off.
And then it's Jody says, tell me the story about when you and Hazel were married. And it's one of those like when a kid gets married like on the playground in elementary school,
but
kind
it's
of thing.
Also like, you know, two old cop buddies like
or soldiers. Yeah.
Tell me about the time you got so married.
And then I like how there's this hint that like Alice knows Hazel still loves her, but she's not going back to him. But then it's never taken that seriously. It's just the way kids will pivot between something is like the most important thing in the world to just, I want to be silly and crazy and I don't care.
Yeah. I also love the dynamic between Jody and Petal.
Oh, Petal's like in love with Jody.
Like
Jody.
Like, hi, Jody.
And like, I love how Jody doesn't react with disgust. He's just kind of bewildered. He doesn't know why she's saying his name like that. He's like, okay.
He's like, hello.
Yeah. So back to my original question. Who would win in a fight? The three kids from this film or the Douglas brothers from Three Ninjas?
Here's the thing. The Douglas brothers were trained by their grandfather to be ninjas.
That is true.
But these kids got paintball guns, and they're accurately good at shooting.
They seem good. They seem like they have at least a minimum of wilderness training, because the way they maneuver and like the way Alice can like give commands, and they have like formations and stuff. They're
like Petal also has magic.
Magic. Yeah,
so
yeah.
I think they.
I do think the Riddle of Fire kids would beat the Three Ninjas. Would you recommend this film to the people listening?
It's like funny. I love the scene when they're leaving the supermarket and the guy's like, I know what you've been doing. I am going to, like, you guys are finally going to come down, return everything that you've given. Like, he gives all this whole speech.
Oh, because they steal all their groceries. And that felt like a very Napoleon Dynamite bit of casting, because the guy's not an actor.
No.
And just his confidence mixed with his awkwardness is what made it so good. But yeah, I would say this is a movie that deserves a lot more attention than it's probably getting. It's going to go under the radar, especially by people that would really love it, I think. And well worth a watch. Like I said, not the most serious movie in the world, but if we had more indie movies like this, I would be very happy with the state of American independent cinema. Well, Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure to check out our show notes for all the important links, including to our website, popcult.blog. Make sure that you are subscribed to be notified when new episodes are up as well. If you visit popcult.blog right now, you're going to find that in June we're doing a flashback to 1989, celebrating the 35th anniversaries of a bunch of films. This week, reviews will be dropping for Gus Van Sant's Drugstore Cowboy, Jim Jarmusch's Mystery Train, and the all-star cast of Steel Magnolias. We'll also be dropping our review of Outer Range Season 2, the sci-fi modern western on Amazon Prime that I think has kind of gone under the radar and is a really good show more people should be watching. If you enjoy what we do on the podcast and over there on the website, we would encourage you to support us on Patreon. We've got lots of different reward levels to pick from. I want to thank our current patrons. We have Ida, who donates at sneak peek level. We've got Becca and Matt, who donate at the writer's room level. If you donate at the writer's room level or higher, you will get to pick a movie every month for us to watch and review. You can even include your own thoughts if you wish. No matter what level of the Patreon you support, you will get access to patron-exclusive podcasts. We've got one series that we're wrapping up. We've got a whole new series that we're going to be launching in July that is about romantic comedies, going through the history of them in 6 movies. And next week, we will be reviewing the South Korean horror film Exuma and the big hit from A24 at this year's Sundance, I Saw the TV Glow. Until next time, you keep listening. We'll keep watching.